Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating legal mystery. Picture a scenario that feels ripped straight from a Hollywood thriller, except it's 100% real and centers around, well, tax documents. We're asking a wild question. What exactly happens when a brand new constitution is born smack in the middle of a massive, highly contentious tax dispute?
So, here's the core question we're tackling today. Imagine a huge tax raid goes down. Boxes upon boxes of documents are seized, but then, just a few days later, a new constitution takes effect, one that suddenly guarantees brand new rights against that exact type of government seizure. Does that earlier raid just instantly become unconstitutional? Like, can a new law somehow reach backward to change the past? Let's find out.
To understand this, we're going to jump into part one, the tax document raid. We are setting the scene in 1990s South Africa, right in the middle of an immense, historic transition for the entire country. But we're zooming in on a really high-stakes legal dispute between a businessman named G. Rudolph, his company, and the Commissioner for Inland Revenue. And as you'll see, timing is literally everything. The drama officially kicks off when revenue officials use Section 74(3) of the Income Tax Act of 1962. Now, this was a piece of legislation that gave authorized officials some sweeping, almost absolute powers. They could walk right into a premises, search the place, and seize any books, records, or documents they thought might be material to assessing a tax liability. Armed with this immense authority, officials raided Rudolph's business in Johannesburg, aggressively hunting for crucial tax documents.
The timeline of how this played out is absolutely critical. On April 22, 1994, officials seized a massive pile of these documents, locked them in a storeroom right there on the premises, sealed the door, and pocketed the key. Fast forward 4 days to April 26th, and Rudolph was actually allowed back into the room to make copies under very strict supervision. Then, the very next day, April 27th, South Africa's historic interim constitution officially went live. That is a tiny 5-day window between a locked door and a totally new era of constitutional rights. Which brings us to part two, the conflict and the loophole. Rudolph and his company quickly realized they were caught right on the absolute boundary between the old laws and these new constitutional protections. They looked at this incredibly tight, chaotic timeframe and saw a potential legal loophole that was just waiting to be exploited. Rudolph's legal team came up with a pretty clever argument. They basically said, hey, because the massive pile of physical documents hadn't actually been taken out of the building and driven away in a van, and because Rudolph was in there actively copying them under supervision on the 26th, the active seizure was still ongoing. In their minds, the seizure wasn't just a single event that wrapped up on April 22nd. No, it was a continuous, active process that bled right over the line into the new constitutional era. And why exactly were they so desperate to prove the seizure was still happening? Because they wanted to use Section 13 of the newly minted interim constitution. Section 13 explicitly guaranteed everyone the right not to be subject to the seizure of private possessions. So if Rudolph could prove the seizure was still happening when the constitution dropped on the 27th, he could get the whole raid thrown out. The government's entire case would just crumble, because it would suddenly be an unconstitutional violation of his new rights. Honestly, it was a brilliant way to try and turn some mundane tax paperwork into a massive constitutional showdown. But that brings us to part three, the problem of retroactivity. To understand how the Constitutional Court responded to Rudolph's clever strategy, we have to look at the legal concept of retroactivity, or what we might playfully call legal time travel. It's a foundational idea in how we apply newly written laws to past events. The big question we have to ask here is this. Can a law that literally doesn't exist yet make an action illegal if that action was perfectly lawful just yesterday? Think about it. If the tax officials acted completely legally under the active laws of April 22nd, does a newly signed document on April 27th suddenly turn them into lawbreakers retroactively? It's a really fascinating paradox. The court looked straight at established precedent to figure this out, specifically a case called Duplessis v. de Klerk. That precedent firmly stated that the Constitution is not retroactive. The court noted it cannot enact that, as at a past date, the law shall be taken to have been that which it was not. Simply put, you cannot use brand new rights to take conduct that was totally lawful before those rights existed and suddenly call it unlawful. The appellants in the Rudolph case were basically trying to bypass this strict rule by claiming the April 22nd event just wasn't finished yet. So we move to part four. When is a seizure complete? We've reached the absolute crux of the matter here. This entire explainer, the fate of the tax raid, and Rudolph's massive pile of documents
all of it hinges on how we define one single, highly contested word in the legal dictionary. The court had to officially define the word seizure, and they determined that a seizure isn't some complex, mystical legal term requiring a specialized dictionary. Taking it in its ordinary, everyday meaning, a seizure is simply a forcible deprivation of possession. It's the exact moment you take control away from the original owner.
To illustrate this, the court relied on some classic reasoning from an earlier case by Judge Murray. He pointed out that you don't have to physically dismantle and carry a massive piece of machinery away to officially seize it. Just putting a government seal on it so the owner can't use it, that is more than enough. The essential feature isn't the physical movement of the thing, it's simply the effective deprivation of the owner's control over it.
Let's apply this directly to our case using a simple physical analogy. Step 1, the tax officials put the documents in a storeroom. Step 2, they locked and sealed the door. Step 3, the revenue official put the key in his pocket and walked away. The court ruled that the moment that key turned in the lock on April 22nd, Rudolph's control ended right then and there. The seizure was 100% complete.
But wait, what about April 26th? Rudolph was literally in the room making photocopies. Well, nice try, but no. The court clarified that letting Rudolph make copies under supervision was just the revenue officials honoring his statutory rights under Section 74(5) of the Income Tax Act. That section allows people to examine and make extracts of seized documents. Accessing them to make copies under a government official's watchful eye did not mean Rudolph magically got his legal control or possession back. Those documents were still fully seized.
Which leads us to Part 5, the final jurisdiction ruling. Because the court definitively established that the physical seizure was completely finished well before the new interim constitution arrived, the final ruling required a strict, formal separation of legal powers between the country's different courts. The jurisdictional fallout was super clear, since the interim constitution simply didn't apply to an event that concluded before it even existed. The Constitutional Court declared they had absolutely no jurisdiction over the matter. I mean, they exist to interpret the Constitution, and the Constitution just wasn't in play here. That left the Appellate Division of the Supreme Court as the only competent court to handle Rudolph's remaining common law disputes regarding the search warrants. It's really important to highlight the absolute consensus on this ruling. Justice Ackerman authored the judgment, and all 9 other judges on the Constitutional Court fully concurred. It was a completely unanimous decision that set this very clear jurisdictional boundary. There was absolutely zero dissent on the basic fact that you cannot retroactively apply constitutional rights to complete administrative actions. And there's this incredible mic drop quote cited in the judgment from Judge Kriegler in a related case, which definitively answers our initial question. Listen closely to this. Nor did, nor could, the subsequent advent of the Constitution render unlawful actions that were lawful at the time at which they were taken. It's a really powerful, sobering reminder that while new laws can absolutely pave the way for a better future, the law itself doesn't possess a time machine. So, as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us pondering a pretty massive question. We know a locked door on April 22nd finalized a seizure, successfully shutting down a constitutional challenge. But looking at the bigger picture, when entirely new systems of justice are born, where exactly do we draw the line between the events of the past and the sweeping protections of the future? How does a society navigate the messy, precise, and often literally locked doors of major historical transitions? It's definitely something to think about the next time you consider the immense power and the strict limits of the law.